My name's James Nugent. I'm a product manager on the Android Enterprise team. Thank you all for coming to both the conference and also to this session as well. I promise it'll be very exciting. Before we dive in, I just want to get a quick feel for the people who are in the room. So who here is from a Android manufacturer? Somebody who makes Android devices? Anyone from that? Maybe not. Okay. Anyone from like a Android developer? Somebody who develops Android applications, perhaps management applications? Okay, fair few. Anyone here from like a customer? Somebody who deploys Android devices in their enterprise, trying to get a feel? Okay, a few more there. Who here came to see Star Wars and is completely in the wrong place? Okay, I can promise you it's not as exciting, but it should hopefully have a few thrills along the way. So I'm here to talk to you about all the features that my team has done in the Android P release, which has just shipped to a developer preview a few months ago, specifically the features relating to the enterprise and work. So our team had three key themes for the P release. The first one was related to managed devices. So these are devices that are under supervision and used in a work environment or perhaps an education environment as well. These are things like the work profile, if people are familiar with that, and also fully managed devices when the corporation will own the device and will kind of oversee every operation that's going on the device. And a key process within that area is device provisioning. How do we enroll devices into management and supervision? The second key area that we focused on is around dedicated devices. Now, Android is open source, very extensible, and we see manufacturers like pushing Android into all sorts of weird and wacky places. These are devices that are used for a single purpose, so perhaps like an airport kiosk or a device that's used in the warehouse for taking stock and taking inventory. So we made a lot of investments in this to sort of mirror the work that our partners were doing, and we'll talk about some of the enhancements and features we've done there with a couple of demos. And then finally, security. Like security will be a race that never ends. We'll continue to invest here. What's nice about the work that my team does is that the feature requests that we hear from enterprises around enterprise-grade security just go into the operating system and permeate out to consumers shortly after that, almost immediately. So we'll talk about some of the enterprise features that are present in the P release as well. So let's talk about managed devices first. As I mentioned, these are types of devices that are used by what we call knowledge workers. So people who work in an office, perhaps, and want to use their device, either a device that they bring themselves into the office, like a BYOD type scenario, or a device that they're given by their employer. So one of the big investments that we made in P was really in response to user feedback. So back in Android Lollipop, I believe, we introduced the work profile. This is where you have effectively a separate user running on the device, and you have very clear segregation between your work apps and your personal apps. This is a type of work mode that works particularly well for BYOD. So if imagine in my case at Google, I own my own personal phone, but I want to get access to my work email. I can add a work profile, get access to all my corporate applications, but my employer has no visibility into any of the personal activities I'm doing on the device. So, as I mentioned, this has been a feature of Android since Android Lollipop, and some of the feedback we got was around improving the user experience. There were some challenges in this area. So firstly, you'll notice on the screen on the left, which is a screenshot from Oreo, that all of the work and personal applications are mixed together. You can see that there's a small badge icon that's used to denote like the personal calendar versus the the personal application versus the work application. And we heard from users it's hard to parse this duplicate list. You have this long list of applications. You have a personal email and a work email. People didn't understand the difference. And this bright orange briefcase felt slightly disconnected from the Android system UI. So we made some changes to that around that in P. So firstly, work and personal applications are separated into separate tabs within the launcher themselves. So there's kind of an inbuilt filter between work and personal modes. You'll notice that the briefcase icon has now changed to a nice shade of blue, more in line with the overall Android system UI, which is using hints of blue here and there. And you'll now notice that we have a toggle right on the front, right up front and center on the work tab, giving users the ability to turn off the work profile. So you imagine the use case here is that it's Friday evening. I no longer want to receive any notifications with work chat or email. I can simply turn off the work profile. Those apps are instantly suspended. I no longer receive notifications. And on a Monday morning, when I'm back in the office and I want to resume, I simply turn that toggle back on. You can also see at the bottom there's a clear indication that this is the remit of my organization. Their management only extends as far as these applications, and they have no sort of visibility into what I'm doing on my personal side. So just to expand across this as well, we've added some user education to make people aware of this new paradigm. So the first time the launcher is opened, you'll see this blue tab that informs that this is the new home for work applications. And as mentioned there before, this toggle to turn off work applications is kind of up front and center with some demarcation as to say this is where your organization's remit kind of extends to. So I'm going to switch to a quick demo of this over on the Wolf Vision if possible. So this is a device running Android Oreo. Just unlock it here quickly. So you can see here that I have got just a regular home screen with a launcher. And when I open the home screen, open my launcher, you can see I have duplicate Chrome icons, I have duplicate contacts, duplicate calendar here, there, and everywhere. So you can imagine that's quite difficult for users to parse, and you may have accidental clicks if users select the wrong icon. The actual ability to turn off the work profile has been available since its inception. It was actually buried up here in quick settings. It's already 2 swipes down there, and then the further swipe to the right to turn off work mode. At this point, work notifications have been suspended, and now when you open the launcher, you see this sort of strange grey icons everywhere, which is not ideal at all. So let's compare that to a device running P. Just unlock quickly. Sorry. So again, the familiar Android home screen. I can swipe up. I've now got work and personal tabs. So all my home applications are here. I've got my personal photos, my personal email, etc. No duplication of applications. You can see that Android is continuing to suggest applications to me at the top, and that will go across both personal and work. You can see there's badged icons up here at the top. But now within the work tab, I have everything kind of grouped together neatly. There's no sort of mix and match of applications. And then on a Friday evening, when I want to go home and have a beer, I just simply turn off the work applications and everything stops. And then switching it back on, very simply, back to the work tab on Monday morning, and I have to unlock again, sadly, but oops. And all my work applications restore. I can now start getting emails, sadly. So if we could go back to the slides, please. So the behavior I've just described there is actually part of the default system launcher that will launch with Android P. But if you're a developer of your own launcher, you too can sort of join in this experience as well. There is an API to request quiet mode enabled. That's what's turning on and turning off the work profile. And when that action is initiated, there's a couple of broadcasts that go out to the system that sort of say like work profile is available and work profile is now not available. And the launchers can use that to kind of change the colors of icons and mark apps as disabled. Any application can query to see if work mode is enabled by calling that API there, is quiet mode enabled. And there's further documentation at that short link if anyone wants to go into even more details. So the next piece of feedback we received from users, again related to the sort of dual persona of applications that you have as a result of work profile. Quite a lot of users have this muscle memory of using the account switcher. If you have multiple accounts on a device, say a personal account and a work account, most users are sort of used to expanding the sidebar menu and toggling between the two account views. With a work profile, because there's such separation between the two users, previously there was no visibility from the personal side of the work user, and vice versa too. So in Android P, we've introduced this ability to be able to switch between the same instance, a different instance of the same application that kind of exists in both profiles. So in this example, as you're seeing with the animation here, I've got the Google Tasks app, and you can see that I've got both personal and work tasks I need to perform. So on my personal side, I've got a dentist appointment, etc., and organizing my wedding. On my work side, when I switch over, you can see that I need to submit my expenses and cancel my one-to-one meeting. Now, previously, the user would have to return to the home screen, find the other application, relaunch that application. But thankfully, from Android P, any application can sort of develop support for this. So there's some critical APIs to support this. The first one is get target user profiles. That will return a list of the available user profiles that are on the device. Typically in a work profile, there'd only be one additional user profile. We provide some icons that you can use to sort of facilitate the sort of smooth UX during the switching process. And you can also get like a localized label to say that, this is the account you're switching to. When the application's ready to launch, you simply call start main activity, and that will launch the instance of the application inside the other profile. And again, full documentation at that short link. But what's crucial about this is it's not just limited to Google applications. Any application that would potentially reside both in the personal side and the work side can implement these APIs, and you too can kind of implement this seamless switching between the two instances. QR provisioning. So one of the focuses for our team is to how do you enroll the device as quickly as possible. So you can imagine I'm an IT administrator. I've got a crate full of devices that I need to provision and give out to my employees as soon as possible. And we support a number of mechanisms around this. There's NFC provisioning. There is zero-touch provisioning, which was launched last year. And one of the methods we've supported for some time is QR provisioning. So this is where an administrator can generate a unique QR code containing like the details of the enterprise mobility management solution that enterprise is using, and that begins the enrollment process. What's new in P is the ability to include Wi-Fi configurations within that code. So historically, if you wanted to add the Wi-Fi configurations, you would have to either enter those manually. And secondly, what's most importantly about this is actually the QR code reader itself is bundled with the operating system. So historically, if you wanted to use QR code provisioning to enroll your devices, you would have to first connect to Wi-Fi, entering manual credentials to do so, download some QR code library to start the process, and then finally scan the code. Now, the good thing about this is it's actually an improvement of 30 seconds per device, because the QR code library is included in the OS, and you can actually bootstrap connectivity straight away. So if you imagine 30 seconds and you've got 1,000 devices, that quickly becomes quite a large time saving. What's nice about the Wi-Fi configurations is that if that Wi-Fi access point is within range, the device just connects immediately, and the enrollment process continues. Setup wizard just continues to go through. We support a number of different Wi-Fi credentials, so things like the name of the SSID, the password. Any proxy details you want to specify, that's all going to be encoded in the QR code. What you might notice is that certificates are missing. So this is an early piece of feedback we've got from partners since presenting this, and that's something we're looking to address in the sort of next Android release. And there's full documentation on that short link there. So when we speak to IT administrators and customers that deploy Android devices in the organization, we get constantly asked for additional hooks and additional tools that they want to configure on the devices. One of the gaps on Android for some time has been around the access point name, the cellular APN that you need to add to a device sometimes. So if I'm a large corporation and I've got a strategic deal with a carrier and they may be given a custom APN, historically that would have to be a manual process to add that into the device. But now we can do that over the air through the EMM. And we've actually given more control to the settings to the IT administrator, particularly around the time and time zone. So we've heard about all sorts of abuse scenarios where if you imagine I'm a truck driver and I've got an Android device, I may want to adjust the time settings on my device so that I appear to be on a break, and then I would no longer push jobs. So sadly, we're clamping down on that practice in Android P. There's a full list of methods in terms of what we support here, and more on the linked documentation. So there's an ability to add what we call an override APN. That's a custom APN, and then enable it. There's APIs to set the time and set the time zone, and a whole sort of selection of additional policies that we've included to kind of lock down certain aspects of the device. That ranges from disallowing airplane mode right the way through to disallowing printing. So if your organization has a problem with people printing spurious amounts of paper, we now have the policy for you. One of the further features we built into Android P is the ability to migrate DPC. So for those of you who are not familiar, a DPC, or a device policy controller, is what the enterprise management tool will actually install on the device, and that's the actual application that's enforcing all these different policies. Sometimes it may be appropriate for a customer to migrate to a different DPC, and there's a couple of reasons why that might happen. So it could be that my management provider is migrating from an old stack to a new stack. A new version of their DPC is required. So this could be we now have the APIs to support that migration. Secondly, the the EMM, the management provider, may be moving to the Android Management API. This is something we launched last year and provides a much easier way for management providers to offer the full suite of management services on their device. So again, that could be another case for DPC migration. And then finally, it could be the case that a customer is actually switching from one management provider to another, and they need to install the new DPC and transfer everything over and maintain all the policies. There'll be no loss of policy in this case. Okay, so let's talk about dedicated devices. So as I mentioned, these are the devices that are often used for a single purpose, or maybe kind of a ruggedized hardware that's been augmented with barcode scanners and all kinds of things. We see lots of innovation in this space within our team. So one of the kind of most popular modes for devices of this type is something we call lock task. So this is locking the device to only be able to use either one or a handful of applications. So you can see on the left-hand side here, there's an example where a device is being locked to be a point of sale. In the current experience, lock task mode only supports a single application. So you're only able to lock to one application at a time. That's certainly not ideal. And what we started to see was some of our partners were implementing workarounds around this because locking to one application probably isn't the best solution. And what happened was those workarounds tend to be quite flaky. We would change something in the OS, and those workarounds would suddenly stop working. So it was the right time to invest in sort of a platform-wide solution. And then secondly, the application developer themselves, so in this case, this point-of-sale application, had to declare explicit support for lock task mode. They had to include something in their application that said, I actually support lock task mode. Now what happened here is because this wasn't perhaps the most people weren't aware of this mode, because it's not a consumer feature, application developers simply didn't include this, and that severely limited the catalog of applications that could be used in lock task mode. So anyway, as always, good news comes in P. So lock task can now support multiple applications, and we have a custom launcher. So we can see here that I've selected 6 applications, and the user is able to use these things come in and out of them as they wish. Any application can be put into lock task mode. So here I've got Chrome and Maps. The Chrome and Maps developers have had to do nothing to support this lock task mode. And then finally, we have more flexibility around the launcher in terms of what UI elements are shown, and the administrator has full control around this. So they can either choose to show the home button, they can choose that certain settings are enabled, or they can lock everything down, and there's no way for the user to use these things. So I'm going to give a quick demo of this if you wouldn't mind switching to the Wolf Vision. So a good example of lock task mode is devices that are locked as a kiosk. So this is something that could be, say like an airport or a library. So within Android P, we now have support for this. And it's actually a very secure model as well. So when the user has actually stopped using the device or chosen to end their session, that entire user is actually deleted. So all their data goes with them. So let me give you a quick demo. So you can hear there's some sort of there's a splash screen here. This can be fully customized. I've just given a very simple example here for Google, and then off we go to start a session. I've got to apologize. This isn't the most glamorous demo. I've only got 2 applications, but you can imagine that one of the applications could be like a help application, and you can see here this is just the applications here. So when the users actually finish their session, they can simply hit end session, and that will clear all of that user data down, or you can wait for the screen to time out, in which case that process also happens. And what you can actually see here when it says ending session is that process of deleting the user and actually creating a new user in the background, so that when the device returns to the splash screen, a new user has been created and the next session can start straight away. So that's the first session. If we go back to the slides, please. Thank you. Sorry about that. A similar but slightly different example of this is around shared devices. So you can imagine perhaps that I work in a supermarket, and I work the morning shift, and I pick up a device on a morning, and I use that to check inventory. I'm walking around checking the shelves. I log in with my credentials, and I'd have access to my applications. At the end of my shift, say 2 p.m., I put that device back on the charging cradle, and then the person who's working the afternoon shift picks up the same device, logs in with their credentials, and they're off and running as well. The crucial difference here is that my application data would remain entirely separate from the second user. They wouldn't be able to read my email or even see any of the kind of inventory scanning that I've been up to. And we provide a very simple way for users to log in and out of this experience. So let me give you a quick example of this. So here you can imagine I pick up a device on a morning and I log in. I've got a very secure password, which I'm about to show you here. And you can see I've got my applications here. So again, very similar to the earlier example, but I've got my selection of applications here. You can see actually I've got my email address. So like there's an email saying, "Hi, Ian." So I could go about, continue my duties, finish whatever I need to do, and at the end of my shift, I would just select End Session. Cinderin comes along, he logs in with his credentials. Again, we enforce very strict password policies. So if I log into Cinderin's email, you can see there is like an email from Ian saying like, "Hello to Cinderin." Again, there's no visibility of each other's data. It's effectively two separate users on the device. And again, when Cinderin is completed, you just simply log out. So there's obviously mechanisms to add new users to the device. So you can imagine that the user may pick up the device and scan a barcode to log into the device. We also support signing in with a Google account. And I believe we also support logging in with third-party authentication providers as well. Thank you. One of the pieces of feedback we hear from users of dedicated devices, so I mentioned like these barcode-type devices that we see in use, is around maintaining control of their fleet during business-critical periods. So a good example is the holidays here. So what the last thing they want to do, what they want to happen is for an OTA update to come and affect all the devices, cause a bunch of regressions to their internal applications, then suddenly, on Christmas Eve, all these applications are kind of failing and people can't make sales. So for dedicated devices, we now introduce this ability for them to postpone, For users of dedicated devices, we've now given customers the ability for them to postpone updates for up to 90 days. Why 90 days? Why did I pluck that number out of anywhere? It's really for November, December, January. That's kind of that period there, and we end up with 90 days. Now, I'm sure you've been to other talks at Google today where we talk about the high investments we're making in security and how we want devices to be updated all the time. So you can imagine introducing something like a 90-day freeze period kind of goes slightly against that. We want devices to be updated. So to prevent devices being locked out indefinitely and hopefully receiving an update once this freeze period is over, we introduce a 90-day cooling off period. So there's a 90-day buffer between any freeze period. So in that time, any kind of OTA updates that have been postponed or frozen out would be pushed down to the device and applied. So this avoids a situation where an admin indefinitely locks out a device. That's a state we don't particularly want to be in. And then all the new features, all the new security updates that come part of the platform update, will be applied during this cooling off period. And then finally on security, as I mentioned, this is an area where we will always invest in. There's a bunch of new features in this area. So let's start with the separation of the work challenge. So you may have noticed actually when I re-enabled the work profile on one of the first demos, I was prompted to enter a password. That's the password that the administrator has required that I have to enter to use the work profile. The administrator can actually specify some quality arguments around that password. They can specify that it has to be a certain length. It could actually be a very long password. Now, what happened in previous versions of Android is if an administrator has said, right, if you want to use the work profile, you now have to use a 12-digit password. That would then manifest itself as the device password as well. So you'd have to, every time you want to unlock your phone, you're having to enter this 12-digit password and then have the same again to access your work profile. So not desirable. Most people want to use a fingerprint or maybe a short password or a short pattern. So in P, we've kind of split these things up a little bit. So admins can require different pins and passwords for the work profile versus the actual unlocking of the device. So it's a bit of a usability win, but maintain the security integrity around the work profile. Data leakage is a consistent concern we hear from customers who use Android enterprise devices, particularly in highly regulated devices or highly secured organizations. So we continue to plug gaps as they come up to our attention. So what we're actually introducing in P is some additional controls about what data can be shared in and out of the work profile. So many people will be familiar with the sort of Android share icon, the share intent. We're now giving administrators the ability to turn that off, either one direction going out of the work profile or into the work profile, or in no directions at all. So we've got full flexibility as to what the direction in which data can travel. We're also we're also giving administrators the ability to prevent extracting data via ADB. So those of you who've used Android Debug Bridge, this is where you connect your phone to your host PC, and you can use that to debug certain information on the phone. Administrators flagged to us that this could be sort of potential security risk, so we now have a policy where extracting data from the work profile via ADB can be disabled. Verified device access continues to be a key feature for around security. This is when a device is perhaps communicating with a remote server and has to strongly attest to its identity. So you can imagine where a device is kind of signing into a remote server, it's maybe identifying itself using its IMEI or its serial number to retrieve whatever configuration it needs to. The difficulty is that IMEI and serial number can be quite easily spoofed, and it could be the case that the device has been compromised and is kind of misrepresenting itself to the remote server. So devices like the Pixel now support hardware-backed authentication. So we now have APIs in the platform as well as presenting my hardware identifiers. I can also present a key or a secure hash of those identifiers that are a strong indication that I am the device who I'm claiming to be. So we now have APIs in the framework that allow you to use either Google's keys or your own keys and certificates to authenticate to remote services. And then finally, not the most sexy feature, I do apologize, but when investigating incidents or security breaches, administrators like the ability to interrogate log files on the device to understand what's been going on. We now have unique identifiers for both network and security logs. So the reason for that is that if the logs have been somehow been tampered with, or logs have been removed, or entries have been removed, that would be easy to detect because there would be some sort of discrepancy in the unique IDs. And then finally, we've expanded the coverage of security-related actions. So there's a sort of additional kind of level of security actions that will now be added into the log files. There's even more listing on security at that short URL, and I'd encourage you all to read it at your leisure. So in summary, there are lots of great features coming Android P. I've talked about the three key areas that our teams work on. So things about the managed devices, the work profile, fully managed devices, dedicated devices where we see a lot of innovation from partners that you wouldn't expect, and then finally, security. Everything I've described here is public information. Feel free to take photos or kind of get started with it. It's all part of the Android P release, and there's full documentation and developer guides at developer.android.com.